Welcome to Shadowed Tales Archive. Tonight's story is titled, The Hollow Beneath Timber Ridge. Let the shadows speak.
Part 1. Things we bury. There are places in this world that feel off, not because they look wrong, but because they feel too still. Like nature's holding its breath, like something is watching from beneath the soil. My name is Riley Lang, and before that summer in Timber Ridge, I used to think ghosts were just stories to scare kids. Now, I'd kill to go back to that kind of ignorance. It started the summer I turned 19. My cousin Dylan had this bright idea to revisit our uncle's old forest property. Said it'd be like therapy, a nostalgic reset, before we all split off for college or life or whatever came next. The land had been in our family for decades, nestled deep in the Appalachians. Not quite wilderness, but far enough out that cell service died an hour before you even saw the trailhead. There were 5 of us in total. Me, Dylan, my ex-girlfriend Marcy, don't ask, long story, Dylan's childhood friend Joe, and Joe's younger brother Theo. We were all supposed to bring something essential. Food, camping gear, first aid. Dylan brought a machete, of course. Said he wanted to feel like a badass in case a bear tried anything. It was funny at the time. We arrived on a Thursday morning, sun high and the sky clean like it had just been scrubbed. The cabin stood just where I remembered it, half buried in ivy, roof slanted like it had shrugged one too many winters. It creaked when you looked at it too hard, but somehow still felt safe. The forest behind it, though, that was different. I grew up visiting this place. I knew every bend in the creek, every crooked tree root. But now the trees seemed closer, taller, hungrier. Joe was the first to mention it. You ever get the feeling like this place forgot we're supposed to be here? She said that night as we sat around a crackling fire. I laughed it off. We all did, except Theo. He was quiet, always was. But that night he kept glancing over his shoulder, eyes twitching toward the tree line like he heard something the rest of us couldn't. "You okay, bud?" I asked. He just nodded, eyes wide. But then he said something that stuck with me. "I think something's buried here, something that doesn't like to be forgotten." The next day we hiked. We stayed on old trails at first, paths carved decades ago by our uncles and their friends. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. Not just fewer birds. No bugs, not even the breeze. Dylan joked it was God's do not disturb sign. That's when we found the hole. It wasn't wide, just a jagged tear in the earth at the base of a collapsed tree. But it went deep, far too deep for something that size. Dylan leaned in first, shining his flashlight down. "Jesus," he muttered, "it just keeps going." The beam didn't catch a bottom. Only a glimmer like something slick and wet was shifting just out of sight. Theo stood back, arms crossed. "We shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "We really shouldn't have come." And that's when the smell hit us, like rotting meat and wet copper. Like something had died, but not completely. We left the hole. That should have been the end of it. We should have packed up and left that night, but we didn't, because that night Marcy disappeared. Part 2. Teeth in the dark. I didn't hear her scream. That's the part one keep coming back to. 1 second Marcy was in her sleeping bag 10 feet away, grumbling about the cold. The next she was gone. No sound, no struggle, just absence. We found the flap of the tent open, the zipper still dangling mid-air, like someone had been dragged out mid-motion. At first we thought she'd wandered off to pee, but when we stepped outside, flashlight beams cutting across the clearing, we saw her footprints, leading into the woods. No return prints, barefoot. "Maybe she's messing with us," Dylan said, but his voice cracked at the end like he didn't believe it himself. Theo stood by the fire pit, shaking. I told you. Something woke up when we opened that hole. No one responded. We followed the tracks. Joe held one flashlight. I took the other. Dylan had the machete gripped so tight his knuckles were bone white. The woods weren't quiet anymore. They were breathing. I don't know how else to explain it. Branches groaned like ribs. Leaves trembled without wind. And beneath it all, something moved with a rhythm that wasn't ours. Wet and steady, like a heartbeat buried beneath the moss. 20 minutes in, we found blood. Just a few drops at first, speckled along bark. Then more, smears along a tree trunk, a handprint pressed into damp soil. Then we found the shoe. It was hers. Canvas, red-stitched, now soaked and torn at the heel like something had grabbed her mid-run. "We have to turn back," Joe said. She wasn't panicking, but her voice had an edge I'd never heard before. Dylan hesitated. "I'm not leaving her out here." "She's not out here," Theo said. We all turned. "She's not here anymore," he whispered. "It took her. Takes people. That's what it does." No one argued, because deep down we knew he was right. We made it back to the cabin in silence. No one talked. No one joked. We just sat by the fireplace, watching the flames try to push back the dark. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw something crawling behind my eyelids. A shape too big for the trees. Eyes that reflected nothing. Teeth that weren't shaped right. Some flat, some curved, some jagged like broken glass. And then I heard it. A scratch. Just one. Slow and deliberate. It came from under the floorboards. At first I thought it was a dream. Then I saw Theo staring at me from across the room, wide-eyed. "You heard it too?" he mouthed. I nodded. The sound came again. A slow drag like claws across old wood. Then a voice. Not loud. Not whispered. Just wrong. Like someone mimicking human speech without understanding it. "Hungry?" Theo backed up against the wall, hands pressed to his ears. Dylan grabbed the machete again, crouching near the fireplace. But Joe didn't move. She was standing at the window, staring out into the tree-line. "Do you see that?" she whispered. I turned. At first I saw nothing. Then the trees shifted. Not from wind, there was none. They bowed inward like something was pushing through them. And then it stepped out. It looked like a man. If a man had been buried for centuries and dug up by mistake. Tall, skin like old bark and rot. Joints too loose like it moved on strings. Its head tilted sideways, jaw slack. Its mouth was too wide. And inside I saw too many teeth. Long, wet, dripping something dark onto the leaves. We didn't scream. We couldn't. It was like the fear froze our lungs shut. I remember clutching the handle of the fireplace poker so hard the metal bit into my palm. And the thing just stood there, watching, not moving, just breathing, like it was waiting. Then it turned and vanished into the woods again. We barely spoke the rest of the night. At some point, Dylan whispered, "We leave at first light." But morning didn't come. Or maybe it did, and the sun just didn't rise. I woke to gray. Not fog, not storm, just gray. Like the world forgot how to be daylight. And outside the window where the woods should have been, there was just mist. Thick, pressing, and something shifting inside it. Something with teeth. Part 3. The Man Without Eyes. The cabin walls felt smaller by the hour. The air had that strange stillness again, like everything outside was waiting. Theo hadn't moved since sunrise, if you could even call that pale haze sunrise. He sat on the floor, cross-legged, sketching symbols into the dust with a stick of charcoal from the fireplace. Joe watched him from the corner, arms crossed tight across her chest. "What are you doing?" she finally asked. He didn't look up. Remembering. Dylan paced like a caged animal. His boots thudded against the rotting wooden floor, machete still in hand. Every 10 minutes or so, he'd stop and press his ear to the ground, like he expected it to speak again. No one was hungry. No one mentioned food. We just waited. It was Joe who broke the silence. "We should have listened to my grandma," she muttered, almost too low to hear. I turned to her. "What do you mean?" Joe swallowed hard, eyes on the boards beneath her feet. "She used to talk about this place. Said our blood used to belong here. That our family helped keep something locked down below." She looked up, her expression haunted, until someone forgot the rules. Theo finally spoke. "It's not just old stories. The land remembers. The thing buried here, it's not dead. It's hungry." I wanted to call them both crazy. I really did. But then Joe pulled something out of her backpack. An old, water-damaged journal. Leather-bound. Burned at the corners. "I found this in the attic before we left," she said. "Didn't know what it was until last night." She opened it. The handwriting was jagged, frantic. Sketches lined the margins. Shapes with too many limbs, faces with mouths where eyes should be. One page was labeled, "The Man Without Eyes." "Wait," Dylan said. "That thing we saw." Joe nodded. "I think that was him." She began to read aloud. "They fed it once a season. Always animals. Never people. Never again people. It watches the tree line. It waits. And when it isn't fed, it chooses." Theo whispered something under his breath. Joe paused. "What was that?" He repeated it louder. "It chooses." Something slammed against the side of the cabin. We all jumped. Dust fell from the rafters. Then again. Thud. This time closer to the window. We backed toward the fireplace, instinctively gathering near the only light source. Joe clutched the journal to her chest. "I think it's mad," Dylan said, eyes darting to the boarded windows. "No," Theo said. "It's curious." That was somehow worse. I don't know why I looked out the window. Maybe I thought I'd catch it leaving. Maybe I just needed proof we weren't losing our minds. But what I saw, out by the tree line stood a man, or something shaped like one. Except where his eyes should have been, only skin, stretched, smooth, featureless. He didn't blink, couldn't, just stood there, head tilted like he was trying to listen to a sound inside the cabin. Joe grabbed my arm, closed the curtain, but I couldn't move. I was locked into that gaze, if you could call it that. And then he lifted one arm, very slowly, and pointed. Right at the ground. Theo gasped. "He wants us to dig." We didn't sleep again. Just sat, curled into corners of the room like children afraid of the dark. The scratching under the floor returned around midnight. This time it wasn't claws. It was something heavier. A dragging sound, like bone against bone. And then, 3 knocks on the cabin door. Not pounding. Not random. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Then silence. Dylan stood, jaw clenched. "I'm done. I'm not sitting here waiting to be picked off like some horror movie extra." He yanked the door open, swinging it wide into the thick gray air. But there was nothing. Only footprints, leading away from the cabin. But they weren't Marcy's. They were barefoot, human-shaped, and they started at the doorway. Theo knelt near them, frowning. "They weren't walking away," he said softly. "They were walking out." Part 4. Things that don't stay buried. We waited until daylight. At least what passed for daylight in that godless fog. Joe sat cross-legged by the fireplace, flipping through the brittle journal like it held answers to a test we hadn't studied for. Theo kept whispering to himself, drawing new symbols into the soot near the hearth. Dylan paced. Again. He hadn't slept in 2 days. His face was hollowing out, eyes bloodshot, lips cracked. "We have to dig," he finally said. Nobody argued. Not because we agreed, but because silence was heavier than logic now. Joe nodded slowly. "There's something underneath this cabin. Something our families tried to forget." Theo whispered, "You don't bury things like this unless they're dangerous." I didn't want to believe them, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that eyeless face, staring through skin, pointing down. We pried up the floorboards with the rusted crowbar we found in the back shed. The wood groaned like it didn't want to give. Underneath, packed dirt, thick, damp, cold. And in the center, a square of stone, carved with something older than language. A sigil made of looping lines and jagged runes, like claws tracing prayers into stone. Theo flinched when he saw it. "I saw that symbol in a dream once," he said. "I was 8, buried in snow. A voice told me it would wake if I forgot its name. No one knew what to say, so we kept digging. It took hours. The fog outside never lifted. We barely spoke. As we peeled back the layers of soil, we started to find bones. Animal at first. Deer. Squirrels. Something that might have been a wolf. Then human. Small bones. Child-sized." Joe dropped the shovel and backed away, hands shaking. No, this wasn't just sacrifice," she said. "They were feeding it." Theo touched one of the skulls gently. "Feeding or silencing?" We hit something solid about 5 feet down. Not stone, not metal, but a box. No, a coffin. Carved black wood, sealed with twine made of twisted hair and old sinew. On the lid, the same symbol from the journal. But this one had been cut through, cracked, defiled. Dylan reached for it. "Don't," Joe snapped. He hesitated. "Look," she said, pointing. "It's already been opened once." The wood had splintered along the edges. Something had clawed its way out. From the inside, Theo began to cry. Not loud, not childishly, just quiet, hopeless sobbing. "We didn't open the door," he whispered. "We just walked through one someone else left cracked." Suddenly the wind picked up. No, not wind. Breathing. The earth beneath us exhaled. A low, trembling rumble passed through the dirt, up our legs into our bones. And then the light in the cabin, dim as it was, went out. Like someone had pinched the air and choked it. We scrambled out of the hole. The fire had died, but no smoke lingered. No embers. No heat. Just silence. And then, a whisper. So close it felt like it came from inside my mouth. "Thank you." We ran outside. Didn't grab our bags. Didn't grab supplies. We just ran. Through the fog. Through the trees that weren't supposed to be that close together. Everything had shifted. The cabin was gone. We turned in a full circle. What had been a clearing was now tangled brush and unfamiliar stone pillars, covered in symbols like the one on the coffin. Joe screamed. Theo fell to his knees. "We're not in the forest anymore," he said. "We're in it." We heard something then. Not footsteps. Not growls. Laughter. Soft. Like a child. It echoed from the trees, then from the left, then from right behind us. We turned. Nothing. But in the dirt behind us, new footprints. Small. Bare. I looked at Dylan. His mouth was trembling. What if we never left that hole? No one answered. Because deep down, I think we all felt it too. This wasn't just a haunted forest. This was a mouth. And we were inside it. Part 5. The names we don't speak. We walked for hours. At least it felt like hours. But the light never changed. That same suffocating, silvery gray pressed in from all directions. Skyless, sourceless. The trees blurred together. Bent in impossible ways. Some curved downward like arches. Others grew out from the ground sideways like broken bones. And through it all, we kept hearing things. Childlike laughter, scraping. A name that sounded almost like your own, but never quite. I think we're walking in circles, I said. No, Theo whispered. It's walking around us. We stopped when Jo collapsed. Her lips were pale, hands trembling. The journal dropped from her pack and hit the dirt like a dead bird. Dylan crouched beside her, but she shoved him away. No more pretending, she hissed. We brought this thing back. You think it's just coincidence? Our blood's tied to this place. We didn't stumble into a curse. We were born from it. Theo picked up the journal and flipped to the final section. Pages stuck together by age and something darker, something sticky. He read, "The firstborn of each line must never say the true name aloud. Not to their child. Not even in sleep. For the name remembers. And when it's called, it comes back." Jo looked up. My grandma used to hum when she slept. Always the same melody. She said it was to drown out something that tried to speak in her dreams. Theo nodded, eyes wide. She was binding it, keeping it from hearing her. Dylan stood abruptly, eyes wild. No. We are not doing this creepy ritualistic horror nonsense. This is just a forest. We're tired. We're hungry. We're losing it. Then he pointed at Theo. And this kid's been talking like he's possessed since day one. Silence. Then Jo said it. "You're scared." "Of course I'm scared." Dylan snapped. "We buried bones. Something's chasing us. My ex is probably dead. You want me to be calm?" Jo didn't flinch. "I mean, you're scared of what it means. That your family didn't just own this land. They fed it." The journal spoke of an agreement. Centuries ago, their ancestors had found the Hollow, an open wound in the forest that never closed. The thing inside promised safety from war, disease, and starvation. All it wanted in return was silence, and the occasional offering. When they stopped honoring the pact, forgot the name, stopped the rituals, it began to hunger. Theo traced a symbol in the dirt. It was never sealed properly. Not after the last offering escaped. I stared at him. "Offering?" He nodded solemnly. Someone was supposed to die in that coffin. Someone from the bloodline. But they ran. And it got out. That night we didn't sleep. We found a small cave off the main trail, if you could even call it a trail anymore. Roots hung from the ceiling like veins. We built a fire that gave no warmth, just light that flickered wrong. Dylan sat at the mouth of the cave, blade on his lap. Jo sat across from me, still clutching the journal like a shield. Theo was humming, soft and tuneless. But it wasn't random. It was the same melody Jo had described. The one her grandmother used to hum in her sleep. Then he said something that chilled me deeper than the cold ever could. "I think I'm the firstborn." Jo looked up sharply. "What?" Theo stared at the fire. "I don't have older siblings. And Mom never spoke about her side of the family. But she cried sometimes, after nightmares. And she'd make me sleep in the basement on certain nights. Said I glowed too bright for it to find me." Dylan stood, pacing again. "This is crazy. No one's dying for some fairy tale curse. We're getting out." But Theo shook his head. "We're not supposed to leave." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He turned to me, and in the firelight I swore his eyes looked wrong. Too deep. Too dark. "If we leave, it'll follow. But if we stay and finish what they started, maybe it sleeps again." And that's when we heard it. Footsteps. Wet, deliberate. Like something dragging itself closer. Dylan raised his machete. "Not this time," he growled. But what stepped from the trees wasn't the man without eyes. It was Marcy. Or what was left of her. She was barefoot. Mud up to her knees. Eyes black, mouth slack. moving like a puppet with broken strings. And she was humming the same tune. "Don't look at her," Theo whispered. "It's not her." But Dylan stepped forward. "Marcy?" She stopped, tilted her head, and then smiled. But the smile didn't reach her eyes, because she didn't have eyes anymore. Part 6. The Blooded Path. Marcy stood at the edge of the firelight, her skin waxy and pale, like it had been stretched too thin over something no longer entirely human. She smiled again, too wide, too sharp. Her arms dangled at her sides like forgotten puppets, fingers twitching with jerky, insect-like spasms. "Don't move," Theo whispered. But Dylan stepped forward anyway, blade in hand, trembling. "Marcy, what did it do to you?" She blinked, slow, almost mechanical, and tilted her head. Then her mouth moved, forming words that weren't hers. Words that shouldn't belong in any human throat. "Blood remembers." The voice was layered, a chorus of whispers beneath a guttural snarl. Then her head jerked back, jaw unhinging too far, and she shrieked. Not a scream of pain, but of hunger. Dylan charged. The machete struck her shoulder, sinking deep. Marcy, or the thing that wore her, didn't flinch. She grabbed Dylan's wrist, and I swear I heard bones snap like twigs. He cried out and fell. She stood over him, mouth dripping black ichor. That's when Theo acted. He stepped between them, holding the journal high like it was a crucifix. He shouted something in a language I didn't recognize, syllables that sounded like roots scraping stone. The creature recoiled, hands pressed to its ears. Smoke hissed from its skin where the sound touched it. It turned and ran, disappearing into the fog without another sound. Dylan groaned from the ground, cradling his arm. Joe knelt beside him, checking the damage. But my eyes stayed on Theo. "You knew how to stop it," I said. He nodded. A binding verse, hidden in the margins. Joe looked up from Dylan's arm. "Why would your ancestors bury something this dangerous?" Theo didn't answer for a long time. Then he said, "Because it was theirs. We left the cave at dawn, if you could call it that. The mist didn't lift, but the trees parted just enough to reveal a path. Narrow, beaten down, lined with sigils carved into tree bark, still weeping sap. The blooded path," Joe whispered. Theo looked grim. "It leads back to the hollow, where it first came through." Dylan struggled to stand. "I can't go with you," he said. My arms screwed. Theo shook his head. "You shouldn't." I turned to him. "What do you mean?" He swallowed hard. I think it'll only let 3 pass." He didn't explain how he knew. He didn't have to. There was something in the air, like invisible fingers counting us. The hollow was balancing an equation. 3 in, 1 left behind. "I'll stay," Dylan said through clenched teeth. "No," Joe said. "I owe Marcy that much," he continued. "She's still out there, or part of her is. I brought her here." Theo placed a hand on Dylan's shoulder. "If it comes for you, speak the name." Dylan nodded, eyes fierce. We stepped onto the path. The moment we did, something shifted behind us. The fog thickened. The woods closed. And Dylan was gone. We walked in silence. Each step felt heavier than the last. The trees leaned inward, whispering. I started hearing things. Laughter, crying, even my mother's voice calling my childhood nickname. I gripped Joe's hand just to stay grounded. Theo stayed in front, eyes locked ahead, muttering verses under his breath. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time stopped making sense. Then we reached it, the hollow. It was a clearing carved into the earth like a crater from some ancient impact. At the center stood an altar. No, not an altar. A mouth, black, endless, wider than it should have been. and around it dozens of figures. Not people, remnants. Some crawled, some walked, some hung suspended by threads of sinew and root, whispering prayers in forgotten tongues. Jo collapsed to her knees. "This is where they did it," she whispered. "This is where they fed it." Theo nodded. "It's not just a place, it's a memory, and it remembers everyone who forgets." Then the ground trembled. A shape rose from the center, tall, skinless, eyeless. The man without eyes. But now he spoke, in hundreds of voices. Some of them were ours. "You brought me back." Jo stepped forward, defiant. "You never left." It tilted its head. "Names are doors, and you opened yours." Theo stepped forward next. "I know the verse. I can seal you." The entity smiled, though it had no mouth. "You are the verse." Then it pointed, not at Theo, at me. "You are the lock." I stumbled backward. "What? No, I don't know anything." But then, I did. Visions flooded my mind. Rituals, generations of silence, the true name whispered into my ear as a baby. My mother's lullabies, my nightmares, all of it, memories I didn't know I had. Theo looked at me horrified. "You're the descendant of the last offering, the one who escaped." The entity spoke again. "Blood remembers. You can finish what she could not." I stared into that pit and felt it call to me. Warm, familiar, home. Jo grabbed my hand. "You don't have to," but I knew I did. Because if I didn't, it wouldn't just haunt this forest. It would spread, it would feed, and it would never stop. Part 7. To seal a mouth. I stood at the edge of the hollow. The ground trembled beneath my feet, pulsing like a second heartbeat, like something beneath the surface was breathing in time with me. Theo and Jo flanked me in silence. Around us, the forest groaned. Branches twisted. Roots uncoiled like veins, reaching for us, eager to drag us down. "I can't do this," I whispered. But I already knew that I would. Because it wasn't about choice anymore. It was about memory. And mine had finally come back. When I was 6, I'd had a dream. In it, my mother stood in a clearing much like this one. She was holding something wrapped in cloth. A bundle. She whispered words I couldn't hear. And then she buried it. She turned to me, her eyes full of fear, and said only one thing. "Don't ever remember." But now I did. I remembered the name. I remembered the blood. I remembered that I was never supposed to come back. But fate or something hungrier had brought me here anyway. The man without eyes stepped closer. He moved like smoke and bone, like wind that had learned to walk. "I was almost gone," he said. "You pulled me back." His voice wasn't cruel. It wasn't angry. It was hungry. Like a prayer that forgot itself and turned into a curse. Jo stepped forward. "There has to be another way. You said he could seal you?" She gestured to Theo. "I am not the seal," Theo said quietly. "I'm the echo." He turned to me. "You're the word, the lock. You have to close it with what they used to open it." I looked into the hollow, and for a moment I saw them all. My ancestors. Dozens of them kneeling in the pit, hands clasped, lips bleeding, whispering names in a spiral of teeth and prayer. And above them all, my great-grandmother. She had my eyes. She had chosen to run. And the price of her flight had rippled forward all the way to me. "What happens if I speak it?" I asked. Theo was quiet. "Maybe it sleeps again. Maybe it takes you. Maybe it doesn't matter." Then the pit yawned wider. Earth crumbled. Jo screamed and stumbled back. Theo grabbed her before she fell. And I saw something rising. Not the man without eyes. Not a creature. But a mouth. Circular. Enormous. Lined with fangs like ivory stalactites. From it came wind that smelled like rot and time and burning churches. And it whispered one last time, "Say it." I opened my mouth, but not to speak, to scream. Because as I looked into that ancient maw, I realized something. It wasn't waiting for the name. It was the name. Every sound I'd heard in the trees, every syllable in my dreams, every hum from my mother's lips. It had been teaching me how to say it all along. Theo shouted something, a binding word. Roots lashed out and coiled around his legs. They pulled him to the ground, slammed him once, twice, then dragged him screaming into the dirt. Joe lunged, grabbing his arm, but it was too late. He was gone, swallowed, like he'd never been there. "No, and no," she screamed, but there was no answer, only wind, and that endless hunger. I turned to her, tears in my eyes. "I have to try." She nodded, sobbing, and I stepped into the mouth, not literally, not physically, but something in me stepped forward. I closed my eyes, let the name rise to my tongue, let the memory shape it, and then I whispered it just once, a word that was also a shape that was also a scream that was also a birth. The world folded, not shattered, not broke, folded, like a map being closed, like a book ending mid-sentence. I felt my skin turn to dust, felt my blood retreat into the earth, felt my name erase itself from time. And then, nothing. Silence. And then, a heartbeat. One, slow, measured, but not mine. The mouth beneath Timber Ridge had closed. For now. I opened my eyes. I was lying in the clearing. The pit was gone. The altar, the roots, the remnants vanished. The forest was just trees again. Real trees. Still and warm and sunlit. Jo sat beside me holding my hand. She looked tired, but alive. "You did it," she said softly. I shook my head. "No." We paused it. The ground beneath us still pulsed. Faint. Almost nothing. But it was there. Waiting. Part 8. The ones who remember. It took them 3 days to find us. Park rangers, a search party, even helicopters overhead. We never saw or heard any of it. Until we woke up together in a clearing not far from the old trailhead. Clothes torn, skin pale, covered in dirt and dried blood. They asked us questions. So many questions. We told them we got lost, that our friends had gone missing in the woods, that we didn't remember anything after the first night. They believed us, mostly because they wanted to, because no one wants to write "forest mouth swallowed them whole" on an incident report. Dylan was never found. Neither was Theo, nor Marcy. The local news ran one story for 3 nights. Then they moved on. Joe and I didn't. We kept in touch, not because we were friends. We weren't, not really, but because there's a bond between people who walk through something like that together. Like war survivors. You don't call often, you don't talk about it, but you don't forget either. I went home, tried to resume a normal life, but something was off. Lights flickered more around me. Mirrors cracked on their own. And sometimes in the middle of the night, I'd wake up humming. The same tune. The one from the dreams. The one from the dirt. Once I found a tooth in my pillow. Human-shaped. Yellowed. Not mine. I burned it, but it didn't scream. And that scared me more. Jo called me 6 months later. Said she was seeing things too. Things in reflections. Things in doorways that vanished when you blinked. She asked me, did we really stop it? I didn't answer, because the truth is I don't know. I went back once, to Timber Ridge, just to see, to be sure. But the trailhead was gone, replaced with thick underbrush and signs that said private property in rusted metal. I climbed over anyway, walked as far as I could, but it wasn't there. The clearing, the hollow. Even the trees looked different, and yet I heard it, faint, a hum beneath the wind, not loud, just waiting. I don't sleep much these days. When I do, I dream of dirt, of roots wrapping around my lungs, of a voice that calls me by my real name, the one only the hollow knows. I tell myself I'm fine, that it's over, but then I remember what Theo said. It remembers everyone who forgets. So I don't forget. I write it down. I speak it aloud. I remember. Because as long as I do, maybe it sleeps. Maybe. If you're hearing this and you're thinking about taking a trip to some off-grid cabin, don't. Not because the woods are dangerous, but because some places aren't meant to be found. They remember. They hunger. They wait. And sometimes they wear the faces of the ones you lost. So promise me something. Don't hum the tune. Don't whisper the name. And whatever you do, don't dig. Because what's buried in Timber Ridge was never really buried at all.
And that was tonight's tale from the Shadowed Tales archive. If it left a mark on your mind, if the silence feels heavier now, then the story did what it was meant to do. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the darkness. New stories are always on their way. Until then, keep the lights low and the doors locked.